I do not hear Tom. Tony? Tony?
And glitches in the agreement between the United States and Iran were cleared away early this morning, and the 52 American hostages should be leaving Tehran, as I say, before too long. 444 days after they were captured. Iranian assets frozen in the United States are moving to England. And from Iran, the word is that the hostages are ready to fly. It was another long night of long-distance negotiations at the White House. We have John Palmer standing by there now. John?
Yes, Tom, with just 5 hours remaining in the presidency of Jimmy Carter, things look very optimistic at this point that the hostages will be indeed free by the time Jimmy Carter does leave office at noon today. Just a few minutes ago, White House Press Secretary Jody Powell told us in the briefing room that the United States has now transferred all of the money over to the Bank of England, to the U.S. Federal Reserve account there. He said at that time that what we were waiting for is the three banks involved to sign an escrow agreement. There are indications now that that agreement may have been signed because there are reports that escrow account. That account will be controlled by the Bank of Algiers, and once the hostages are released, the Bank of Algiers will then free that money from the escrow account. That money will go to Iran, the hostages will be free, and then the deal will be made. Once the hostages are out, we don't know what the procedure is going to be there, but we do expect them to go to Algiers before they go to Wiesbaden, Germany. President Carter has been up throughout the night. He has not had even a cat nap, we are told. He has been conferring with his various advisors, the Secretary of the Treasury, Press Secretary Jody Powell, a number of advisors in the Oval Office, and now there is great optimism here at the White House.
Very unlikely that the hostages will be anywhere on American soil, either at an Air Force base or whatever, before Jimmy Carter leaves office. Germany, that was the original intention. We're now told that what Ronald Reagan wants him to go as his personal emissary?
That's true, Tom. There is kind of a scenario here. If everything works out well, the president will leave, of course, just after the inauguration of the President Reagan. He will then go to Andrews Air Force Base, where there will be a very brief military review. Then, because of all of the arrangements that have been made for a big homecoming in Plains, Georgia for President Carter, he is expected at that point to go ahead with his plan to go down to Plains for that festivity, street dancing and square dancing and what have you. If the hostages by that time are in Germany, then it is expected that the president could well take off on the presidential jetliner made available by President Reagan and fly as President Reagan's personal emissary to Wiesbaden, Germany, perhaps an overnight flight that would put him in Germany to see the hostages sometime tomorrow morning. Of course, all of that depends upon things going very well the next 3 or 4 hours and that the hostages would be freed. We have, I think, more on this story now from Bob Kerr at the State Department. Bob?
Good morning, John and Tom, everyone. We have just had word in here of a news conference held in Iran by Behshad Nabavi, the chief hostage negotiator in Iran, who has told a news conference that the hostages are ready to fly and that all preparations are made. That doesn't mean this will happen right away, of course. It's contingent upon the finalities of this agreement and the transfer of the money all being completed. The final step, of course, the key will be Iran's acceptance of Algeria's confirmation that its frozen assets, Iran's frozen assets, are in escrow, ready to be made available once the hostages are free. There is some concern here, just a little bit, I might emphasize, some concern about the method of confirmation Iran will require. There is some concern Iran will demand a hand-delivered written document, which could mean a delay of a few hours. But most people here believe that Iran will do it in the quickest way possible, which would be by cable or by phone. The plan, as it was described to me here just a little while ago, is that the hostages would board 2 Algerian jets for a 7.5-hour flight to Algiers, then be on the ground there for about 1 hour, change planes, boarding a U.S. medevac plane for a 2.5-hour flight to West Germany. The State Department says as of a few minutes ago it still has not dispatched most of its hostage recovery team over to West Germany where it would meet the hostages, but that could be done very quickly.
Thank you, Robert. Bob Kerr at the State Department this morning. John Palmer standing by at the White House, and they'll be there throughout the full 2 hours of today in case there are any late-breaking developments, as we expect there may be. Once again, it was a busy night in Algiers. That's the negotiation center for all three new dealings between Washington and Iran and Algeria. But in Tehran, we're told, the mood was far different. We get that story narrated from Steve Mallory in London.
The Algerian intermediaries were relaxed this morning. Doctors at their hotel for coffee. The doctors who had examined the American hostages yesterday. The meeting was casual. Sign of urgency. No one in a hurry. Algeria's ambassador to the United States, Reda Malik, who leads the delegation, talked openly about the negotiations. The chairman of Algeria's National Bank, Mohammed Mustafa, seemed to agree with what Malik had to say. What we overheard seemed to indicate the Algerians were tired, frustrated, and annoyed by the recent events, that they looked forward to a resolution. Many times they said, Inshallah. Arabic means God willing. After their talk, the mediators left the hotel, not saying where they were going. At Tehran's Mehrabad airport early this morning, armed guards patrolled around this Algerian 727, one of the aircraft that may soon take the American hostages out of Iran. Airport officials have been told not to give information to reporters, but a member of the Algerian crew, still at his hotel at midday in Tehran, said he still hadn't been advised when they would be leaving the country. Steve Mallory, NBC News.
As we have been saying, once they get into the air, the plan still is for the hostages to be flown to Frankfurt, West Germany, and then transferred to an American military hospital in Wiesbaden. We have Richard Valeriani standing by this morning in Frankfurt about the preparations there. Richard? Apparently, we are not able to get any sound from Frankfurt, West Germany this morning. Let me just tell you that the preparations have been in place for some time now. No late change in those preparations. There still is some dispute about when the families may be able to join the hostages at the military hospital in Wiesbaden once they arrive there, whenever that may be. Outside Blair House this morning, Steve Delaney standing by. Blair House, of course, is where Ronald and Mrs. Reagan are spending their final night as the president-elect and the soon-to-be First Lady, because today at noon, Ronald Wilson Reagan will be sworn in as the 40th President of the United States. He's been staying in touch with this Iranian situation through aides primarily. Steve Delaney, as I say, has the latest on that. Steve, what's going on?
Tom, the president-elect is still inside Blair House and will be for about another 2 hours. Then he will go to church for a brief ceremony around the corner and come back here. And a little shortly after that, we'll go off to the White House and then to the Capitol. We don't know yet whether he's awake. He woke up at about this time yesterday morning after not having been told by his staff of the developments that occurred 24 hours ago that we all thought were the breakthrough. But the chances are, if he doesn't know what's happened in the last few hours on the Iranian situation, he will very soon. One of the things that is contributing to this deadline pressure about 12 noon or 12:30 is that it has been said around here that Reagan is not particularly anxious to sign any documents or to authorize any moves that might accompany the latter parts of the implementation of this process, because he doesn't want to start his incumbency with anything that might being conciliatory toward Iran. He'd rather get a clean start. He'd rather head all that off his deck by the time he takes the watch. He will be out of here in a couple of hours, and when he comes out, somebody is bound to ask him what he thinks about all that. Tom?
Thank you, Steve. We expect that you'll be there for that as well. Mr. and Mrs. Reagan spent their inaugural eve with a few of their friends from show business and a few others looking in. A report from Susan Peterson.
Ronald Reagan spent his last hours as a private citizen with his old Hollywood buddies and 17,000 other admirers who attended a gala to honor the nation's next president. Guests paid as much as $1,000 for box seats to watch big-name entertainers perform for the inaugural of one of their own. But the star of the evening soon found that his future presidential status leaves him wide open for friendly barbs.
News, we have an inflation, we have a recession, unemployment, turmoil around the world, an energy crisis. And starting tomorrow, we blame all of that on you, Ron. As you know, tomorrow the President-elect will take the oath of office at 10 o'clock in the morning. And by 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, Ted Kennedy will be saying, "Ask yourself, are you better off now than you were?"
Afterwards, the Reagans came on stage to thank the performers, especially the one responsible for bringing them all together, a man Mr. Reagan called Francis Albert.
Almost every day for a long time now, people have said to Nancy and myself, well, has it really sunk in? And we've looked at each other and we've said, well, no, it really hasn't. Well, tonight, there was a point in the program when I leaned over to her and said, it's sunk in. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Susan Peterson, NBC News, Washington.
And now, standing by live in front of the west front of the Capitol at noon today, Willard Scott, who's a three-ring circus himself. Willard, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Jane, and good morning, everybody. We're standing by here where in just a few hours the oath of office will be taken. I want you to walk around with me for just a second and take a look at what we can show you at this hour. What you hear in the background, the music, if you heard it a moment ago, is the United States Marine Band. They're not here, but that is a tape recording. There they are, and they're checking out the equipment. I got to give them credit. I don't think I've ever seen them blow one of these. They go crazy. I mean, they check every single little circuitry to make sure that everything is perfect. I thought the least we could do was to help out a little bit this morning, so I brought my handkerchief and put the final touch on. Mr. President, if you're watching, this is for you from NBC and Today. Okay, we're going to do the best we can, and this is what we call an on-the-air rehearsal. Would you be with me for just a second? Steve, baby, back in the control room. All I want to see this morning is the national map, and then I'll give you the 10-second cutaway. We have just a little bit of equipment here to work with. Okay, let's check the map and see what we have this morning across the country. All right. First of all, there's rain again in the northwest. Fog continues, heavy fog. Poor old Salt Lake City still getting a bath as far as smog and fog is concerned. High pressure, a dome of it will not move. Warm air continues. Temperatures up in the 60s as far north as parts of Montana. Cooler air coming into the plain states, but not frigid cold air like we had last week. Some wet snow from central Missouri all the way on up through the upper Great Lakes. Some rain throughout the middle Mississippi Valley, the Ohio Valley, and down in the southeast except for Florida, where we're calling for sunshine. Here in Washington, D.C., Inauguration Day, on the cloudy side, but still mild, high about 50 degrees. Now let's find out what's happening in your part of the country this morning. We have Boston 38, Chicago 38 degrees and some clouds, Dallas 45 and partly sunny, and Denver 52 and sunshine. Well, that's it. In just a few hours, here's where it'll happen. Leather chairs in place, all the equipment being prepared, the sound system dynamite, and now back to you, Tom and Jane.
And you know that weather forecast is going to be absolutely correct because it was done with the presidential seal. Lovely, Willard. In a couple of minutes, we'll be back. Louisa Kennedy is here again. As I understand it, she hasn't slept in about the last 24 hours. And from Burbank, the Reverend Earl Lee, the father of a hostage in Iran. We'll talk to them both in a moment. This is Today on NBC. Well, another day has gone by and the hostages still have not left Tehran, or a more positive way, I guess, to look at it is another day nearer to the day when the hostages will come home. With us again this morning is Louisa Kennedy, who is the wife of hostage Moorhead Kennedy. She was with us yesterday morning when we were, well, all but certain that come this time we would have better news than we have now, though we're still hopeful. And in Pasadena, California, the father and mother of Gary Lee, who is also a hostage, the Reverend Earl Lee and Hazel Lee. And good morning to you as well. Let me begin with Mrs. Kennedy, if I may. You have been up all night, not merely listening to the radio or television for news, but much closer. You were at the State Department all night long.
Catherine Keogh and I spent the night in the Operations Center.
And you said it was quite a dramatic night. How so?
I would say so, yes, in as much as it began to look between 3 and 4 as if everything was on the road. The decisions had been taken, the initialing had begun again, and there seems to be agreement, generally speaking, on all, well, definitively speaking, Now I think what we're waiting for is all of this to be transmitted to Tehran and taken to the foreign ministry there.
You here yesterday, as we said, expecting that yesterday might have been the day. Your optimism doesn't, to me, appear to have waned in the least. In fact, you look perhaps more confident today than you did yesterday.
Jane, let me say that almost any negotiation of this kind is going to run into snags. I think the fact that this one has been so highly publicized, it's so emotional, and everybody hangs on every single development with an almost intense fury, that I think it takes it out of the perspective that you really should keep it in. I mean, as I say, any negotiation of this level is complicated, and it is going to run into snags or glitches or what have you. So it's fairly normal in that sense.
Reverend Lee, Mrs. Lee, how did you spend the last 24 hours? Comfortably or excitedly? Were you, well, how was it?
I'd say rather guarded excitement when we really come to it. We've had 3 hours sleep, I think, and only for NBC would we get out of bed at this early, and for Gary. And incidentally, it's happy birthday to my wife. This is her birthday. Wouldn't it be great if we got the news?
Happy birthday to you. Yeah, we hope you get some terrific news on this birthday. Reverend Lee, you're wringing your hands. Is that nervousness from television now?
Thank you, Jane. I'll take care of that problem. My wife has been accusing me of that now for some time. That will never happen again, I promise you.
What good spirits. You are obviously in very good spirits this morning.
Yes, it's a good day.
Your patience is not wearing thin. Do you know of the other hostage families bearing up evidently as well as you are? Do you know?
Well, the only one we check with and know is, of course, Pat, Gary's wife back in Falls Church, Virginia. And she has been trying to help us to be patient, and we have been trying to help her. I think yesterday was a day of cautious waiting. We thought we'd get word last night. But tomorrow would be another day, we said, and here it is, and we look for it. And let's imagine they'll be off the ground not too many hours from now.
Are you entertaining any thoughts of coming east for the reunion, or further east, going to Wiesbaden, perhaps?
I say we plan to go to Washington is our biggest hope, to see Pat and Dana and, of course, Gary.
Lloyd Bucher, who was a member of the Pueblo crew, as you know, apparently said last night that he thinks that the hostages should be reunited with you, with the families, right away. Would you disagree with him? He perhaps should know wherever he spoke. He's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but he's been there. What do you think?
Oh, I rather think the plan that has been designed is good. For them to go to Germany, to have the necessary checking out, psychological testing and physical testing, and coming home together, I think it's good.
Well, we hope it's good, too. Louisa Kennedy, that you are still in Washington where where today is the day President-elect Reagan will become president, and the town is all wrapped up. Does this day, the inauguration, mean anything special to you, or is it just, never mind all that?
Oh, no, it hasn't lost its significance for me, I don't think. It's a very exciting day. It is, as this new administration says, a new beginning.
Many people are giving credit for we hope, return of the hostages, too. Mr. Reagan, do you think that's unfair to President Carter?
What's unfair?
Giving the credit for our good news, we hope, today to Mr. Reagan and not Mr. Carter.
Who's giving the credit to Mr. Reagan specifically?
Oh, I just hear man on the street comments to
well,
that effect.
I think there are lots of views about that, but I think it's President Carter who has lived this year and been effective in it.
Thank you again for being with us. Reverend and Mrs. Lee in Pasadena, best of good luck to you and happy birthday.
Can I say hi to them?
And yes, Louisa Kennedy says hello too. Station break.
Good morning, everyone. Dawn over the nation's capital, specifically over the west front of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and there you can see final preparations for the inauguration of Ronald Wilson Reagan as President of the United States. In the judgment of some, the 40th President of the United States. For those who are more persnickety, the 39th President, because after all, Grover Cleveland held the office twice, interrupted by one other term. So he was both, as I remember, the 22nd and the 24th President of the United States.
You sound like you're of the persnickety persuasion.
I am the persnickety persuasion. I think he's the 39th, but I think I'm going to lose the battle to all of my colleagues. During this half hour of today, we'll be taking a look and a talk with a man by the name of Robert Strauss. You've seen him and heard him a great deal on this program in the last year. He was President Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign chairman. He has a lot to say about what's ahead for the Democrats and some advice, I would guess, not just for all of us, but for the Republicans coming to office as well.
He's been seen at a Republican party or two as well in these last few days. The Republicans are here en masse, and they brought some dough with them. They are not burgers during their State of the Inaugural, and in Money Matters we'll have a report on how much revenue the District of Columbia is reaping from this Republican windfall.
I tell you, in some families who are here for the inauguration, you have a feeling that they're not only teenage telephones but teenage limousines. Time now to take a look at the latest news. We're waiting right now for word that the hostages will be in the air, that they will be leaving Tehran before too long. Let's get the very latest by going live to the White House, where John Palmer is standing by. John, what are they saying there?
Tom, just a few minutes ago, in fact about 15 minutes ago, White House Press Secretary Jody Powell called us into the briefing room here at the White House, and he gave us this announcement confirming that now all of the frozen Iranian assets have now been transferred to an escrow account at the Bank of England under the control of the Algerian government. And Powell went on to say this completely fulfills all of the steps which the United States agreed to prior to the release of the hostages. And Powell said, "We have now done all we said we would do." Powell said all that remains now is for a technical process to be completed, and that can be done very quickly. It is being done as we speak, and that is to send the message, the Algerians communicating via telex and telephone to the Iranians in Tehran saying the money is here, release the hostages. We couldn't get any time frame exactly when the hostages will be released because, of course, the White House doesn't know. They thought they would be released yesterday. But now the mood is very much one of optimism, and it could come within an hour or so. There are great hopes here that the last obstacle has now been passed. Tom?
Thank you very much, John. And Jimmy Carter had hoped that his final act as president would be to fly to the Army Hospital in Wiesbaden, West Germany, and to greet the hostages. That hope is gone now. But the word is that Ronald Reagan has been in touch with Jimmy Carter, and he wants him to go as President Ronald Reagan's personal emissary. So the plan now is for Jimmy Carter to go to Plains after the inauguration of Ronald Reagan and then go on to West Germany, should the hostages arrive there in time. Happiness was the mood for Ronald Reagan as he prepared to spend his last night at Blair House before moving across the street, and into the White House as our new president. He and Nancy Reagan moved up the steps after a gala last night. There was time for just one last question.
Do you have any thoughts on the eve of your inauguration?
Yes, great anticipation.
Thank you.
In Money Matters, the price of gold on the London market this morning is $563.50, down $3.25 from the previous fix. A government report says that personal income of Americans increased by 11% last year, but the inflation rate was 12.5%. Short-term interest rates are moving up again. So, beginning Thursday, the rates for 6-month money market certificates will increase to 14.731%. Here in the capital this inauguration week, there's an economic mini-boom. The inauguration is dumping a 32 Washington.
Oh, we're going to go to the restaurants, we're going to go to the parties, we're going to go to the galas.
The Republicans have swallowed up nearly every hotel room, and while they're here, they're temporarily ignoring any economic worries. They are spending
1,500.
About 1,500. Oh, about 1,000 or two. California always spends more.
The Sheraton Washington Hotel rehired 200 of its staff laid off after Christmas. This week, they're working extra days and overtime. Republicans are not merely eating, they're eating well. The banquet manager is surprised at how much they're spending.
There was a Texas oil millionaire who just called us up, and he wanted to order a dinner for 200 people, and we were expecting an order for a Reuben sandwich, and it turned out that we're going to have a $10,000 check on this dinner.
This wholesale food supplier made 200 extra deliveries in the past week, many high-priced hors d'oeuvres and seafood entrees. And next week, most of these workers will take home 20% more in their paycheck. Moderate-priced restaurants are running out of steak and lobster and report customers are spending 30% more to celebrate.
In honor of Ronald Reagan, we decided to order a little lobster and go first class.
In Washington, the Republicans are making it Christmas and New Year's all over again. And teaching the Democrats a thing or two about big spending. Speaking of windfalls, Willard is standing by. We'll go to for his weather report in a moment. But first, message.
Jane, we're standing by at the Capitol of the United States, Washington, D.C., at the Capitol building. This is where it's at, as they say. And, Jane, this is a piece of souvenir, inaugural wood that I bought for you. And it's all going to come back to the Today Show just for you. Let's check the weather and see what it's like. Actually, some sunshine here in Washington this morning, a little bit. It's supposed to be cloudy and about 50 degrees when comes time for the inaugural address right here at the Capitol. Let's check the map and see what we have this morning. See the temperatures, a little cooler air dipping down over the Great Lakes down the middle Mississippi Valley, but not bad, not like the cold front we had last week. Generally speaking, outside of some fog in the west, Salt Lake City still got that smog and fog, a dome of high pressure, warm in the west, rain in the northwest, showers in the southeast, some showers in the middle Mississippi Valley, snow from Missouri on up to Chicago and the upper Great Lakes, but mild in the northeast. Now let's check and see what's happening around the country this morning. We have New York 41 and partly sunny, St. Louis 47 cloudy, Phoenix 70 and partly sunny, and Miami 73 and partly sunny. And that is it. It's not a bad day at all. If it just holds off a little bit, we might even have some sunshine by 12:30. Now back to you, Mr. Foreman's favorite First Lady.
Thank you, Willard. Sportsman of the Week is brought to you by the Bell System Yellow Pages, reminding you that your public telephone is the easy way to call as soon as you can. Here's Bryant.
We come from the ranks of active coaches and players. But since this January 20th is kind of special, I think it appropriate that we vary from the Tuesday norm and turn our attention to the man of the hour. So far this morning, he has been analyzed and hailed as president, governor, leader, and family man. So a moment now to examine Ronald Reagan as sportsman, in fact and fiction. It would be nice to say that Ronald Reagan captained his Dixon High School football team and was its star. Nice, but not true. In truth, he was an offensive guard, an undersized guard at that. Later at Eureka College, he lettered in football and swimming, sports he turned to because he was too near. Still, he got involved with baseball in the early 30s by recreating Chicago Cubs games on WHO radio in Des Moines, Iowa. By the late 30s, he had gone from the press box to the playing field as a star who broke training at VMI in the movie Brother Rat.
2 fourth-classmen were reported absent from the room at midnight inspection last night. One of them was apparently in Mr. Randolph's cot. What about the other? Gentlemen, are these new cadets to be punished? Or are the truly guilty parties willing to take the penalty?
Colonel Ram, one of them was in my bed.
The other one was in mine, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. You both report to your room under arrest.
But, sir, the game.
I'm sorry, but that can't be considered a question of discipline. You should have remembered the game last night, Mr. Crawford. I explained the whole situation to the coach.
2 years after Brother Rat, Ronald Reagan exchanged the diamond for a gridiron and went from VMI to Notre Dame as the legendary George Gipp in the movie Newt Rockney All-American. He was the famed Gipper Pat O'Brien asked the team to win one for. He was fast, elusive, tough, consistent. In the movie, the classic All-American, on and off the field.
I'll never be but or anywhere else. He's given us something they don't teach in schools. Something clean and strong inside. Not just courage, but a right way of living that none of us will ever forget.
By 1952, Ronald Reagan had put George Gipp and Newt Rockney long behind him. He was, in fact, back to talking baseball, albeit with different intent, to Rhonda Fleming.
How do you know?
Because I'm in charge of this party.
Oh. Looks like I'm playing right field on this club. That's a baseball expression.
Yes, I know. I used to pitch for the mission team.
Bet you got a pretty good curve at that.
The pitch Reagan made to Rhonda Fleming was nothing compared to those he threw at opponents in a film entitled The Winning Team. As Hall of Fame pitcher Grover Cleveland Alexander, he fired almost nothing but strikes and proved to be a memorable and popular favorite with his public.
For Chicago, Alexander pitching.
Remember you, don't they? You've given them something to remember, Alex.
Although Ronald Reagan was a more memorable sportsman on film than in life, the same cannot be said of his vice president. George Bush captained a Yale baseball team that finished second in the College World Series. Years from now, when Congressman Jack Kemp, an ex-Buffalo Bills quarterback, runs for president against Senator Bill Bradley, an ex-New York Knicks forward, their sports exploits may be headlined again and make for a better sports story. But for the moment, they are overshadowed by a good field, no-hit college baseball player and an undersized high school football lineman, who on this day have combined to make the winning team something more than just the title of another Ronald Reagan movie. The Today Show will continue right after these messages.
15 before 8 o'clock right now. Just to bring you up to date on the Iranian situation, all the hitches and all the glitches have been cleared out of the way, and we expect that the hostages will be flown out of Tehran momentarily, but still no word that their airplane is in the air. Our next guest this morning, I know that you'll recognize here on the Today program. For a long time during the course of the campaign, people thought he was on the staff here. He was appearing so much. It's Robert Strauss, who was President Carter's campaign chairman. He will be around Washington in the coming administration, as he has been through many administrations. Mr. Strauss, you were in touch with the president last night. Did you talk to him?
Yes, I was with the president last evening around 7 o'clock.
Yeah, what was his frame of mind? Frustrated?
Oh, I think a bit frustrated. The president was calm and determined, and I guess he knew he was going to be up all night again.
Was he upset that he was not going to be able to greet the hostages as President of the United States?
Well, the President doesn't show. I'm sure inside there was some turmoil, but he didn't show it. He was quiet, he was in good humor, and he was firm, and altogether I'd say he looked like a man at peace with himself.
Looking forward to going back to Plains?
Well, I don't know that. I wouldn't say. I don't think one enjoys leaving the White House and going anywhere. But he's accepted the fact he's going back, and he'll go back in good grace and good style, in my judgment.
You are a partisan, a Democrat, a man who ran Jimmy Carter's campaign, but you're also a great conciliator around this town. What should the Republicans be aware of in the coming months, in the coming weeks in this administration?
Oh, Tom, I suspect they ought to realize that this euphoria is not going to last very long, and that people are going to be pretty critical pretty quickly. They want to see something. What's happened to me that makes my life better, and they want to see that quickly, and so they ought to move fast, and they ought to move strong and decisively, get as much done as they can, as quickly as they can, and see if these programs they've stood for, number one, they can put in place, number two, if they'll work. The country has a right to see that, and we all have an obligation to help them, I think, where we think they may be on the right track.
Your fellow Democrats who are in a majority in the House of Representatives, do they agree with you on that in your judgment?
Well, I think that there's some differences in philosophy, and you have to stand for what you believe in. But generally speaking, I think that the administration is going to get a full measure of cooperation. And that doesn't mean that this is a two-party system. It served this country well. And it's good that we always have sometimes Democrats and sometimes Republican in. It's good that we shift, not so dramatically, but only slightly as we do. And it's good that we have a responsible dialogue. You know, the two-party system isn't mentioned in the Constitution, but it's a part of this government almost. It serves this country well.
How much do you think that the Democrats should spend in the next 18 months or so repairing the damages from the loss of the Senate and the loss of the presidency and getting what a lot of people are calling a new unified agenda?
Well, I think this. Number one, we ought to forget about the presidency for the next couple of years. We ought to concentrate on the 82 campaign. And I think we will do that. And we've been talking about that. I was with Speaker O'Neill yesterday for a while. We talked just about that. We ought to concentrate on that. We ought to articulate what we stand for. and we ought to do it clearly, where the country will always have a choice.
Do you think that the era of the New Deal Democratic Party is now thoroughly dead?
Oh, I don't like labels. I think there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans. I think it's an important difference. I think it's good they're Republicans. I think it's good they're Democrats. As I said, the process serves us well. And I think you'll see, you know, I remember when, after the Goldwater defeat, we said that the Republicans were through forever. And after the McGovern defeat, the Democrats were through forever. So things are never as bad as they seem or as good as they seem. Things will be well in this country, and I wish the new president well. This is a great day for he and Vice President Bush. It's their day. I wish them well now and in the future.
Thank you. Bob Strauss, who is with us once again today, and after one of his appearances during the course of this last campaign, called me on the telephone. We began to have a little argument about what he said on the air, and he said to me, he said, Brokaw, I've taken that program of yours and that boyish little face, and I've given it real maturity. You ought to be grateful for that. 11 minutes now before 8 o'clock, back after a station break.
Friday, the Harper Valley PTA thinks Stella's pregnant.
A Southern tradition. The premier spring and summer bridal showing this Saturday at 1 in the Hyatt Regency Ballroom. Presented by Modern Bride Magazine and Cass Nunat.
Do news stories ever make you mad? Do you have a point of view no one's expressed? Well, each week on The Scene at 6, Talkback gives you a chance to have your say. Send your letters to Talkback, Box 400, Nashville, Tennessee, 37202. We're waiting to hear from you.
Watch Newt Rockney today at 3 on Channel 4.
Well, people have been using all kinds of available transportation to come to Washington for today's inauguration festivities. I've been told there are something like 400 limousines borrowed from New York City alone. But if you really want to travel right, Eric Burns has some thoughts for you.
It sounds almost as if we're getting into an Amtrak commercial here, but this is actually a tale of two trains, one of which left Plains, Georgia 4 years ago, the other of which left Terre Haute, Indiana just 4 days ago. In 1977, a few hundred Georgians took a train to Washington for Jimmy Carter's inauguration. In 1981, a few dozen Indianans took a train to Washington for Ronald Reagan's inauguration. The differences in the trains suggest the differences in the administrations. For instance, the Democrats rode in a plain old Amtrak train, which they called the Peanut Special, whereas the Republicans rode a 50-year-old car called the Erie 400, which used to be the private property of J.P. Morgan, and has brass chandeliers, walnut walls, marble sinks. The Democrats paid $260 apiece for their train ride. The Republicans, $750 apiece. For hors d'oeuvres, the Democrats had 275 pounds of peanuts. The Republicans, marinated asparagus spears wrapped in prosciutto.
We are grateful for the privilege of meeting here this evening as free Americans on our way to a historical event in our nation.
The foods that followed these sentiments were vichyssoise, shrimp bisque, filet mignon with béarnaise sauce, potatoes d'or. J.P. Morgan would certainly have approved. He would also have approved of the sentiments that followed the food.
I've been precinct committeeman, and I worked awful hard for Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and I'm so thankful that they're going to go in Tuesday.
I know where you stand politically, but I've got to know how you feel about the fact that we're lurching back and forth all night, all the way to Washington. Are you going to be able to take all this?
We don't feel the same. This is great. The great feeling of going to Reagan's inauguration.
It's a great way to become close.
There's a reason that you folks don't feel a thing, but it doesn't have to do with politics. They call themselves pachyderms, these wealthy Republicans from Indiana, and sometime Saturday night, rolling through West Virginia, they added a new member to the group, to his great surprise.
So we have for you tonight, and we have created you an honorary member of the Pachyderm Club of Terre Haute, Indiana.
I thought you guys were going to pour a bucket of ice over my head.
No, that's something that I'm sure you shall cover the rest of your life.
I'm now an honorary Republican?
No, just a Pachyderm member.
That don't mean you're a Republican.
Now, for the initiation.
Well, now that's where the bucket of ice comes in?
No, you have to show your trunk.
Bobby, how about if you don't roll it? I'll show my trunk to conserve my plaque. The Erie 400 pulled into Washington early Sunday morning. The Republicans exhausted from a night of partying, and the new pachyderm not having revealed his trunk. Well, that's just a small sample of the tremendously high good spirits in Washington these days, which I guess it's fair to say that we all hope will be a lot higher very soon, not with news of a train ride, but with news that hostages are airborne, and everybody will be as happy as those Republicans on that train.
Just to be hospitable, you might at least have shown them your duffel bag.
The duffel bag, yeah. The trunk, no. No.
We'll be back in a moment with more on Today, but first a message.
This is the day of the inaugural parade, of course, and then tonight, the inaugural balls. They're always an important part of inaugural week in this country, as you will see in this inaugural moment on Today. Before the president buckles down to work, there traditionally is an afternoon and evening of festivities. The big daytime event, the parade, with bands and floats from all over the nation, in this case from geographical regions. And in the evening, the inaugural balls, with presidents going from event to greet the celebrants. And that will happen tonight for Ronald Wilson Reagan and Nancy Reagan. Lyndon Johnson dancing at his inauguration, as you can see right there. And with the swearing in of Ronald Reagan, we'll be able to do away with the clumsiness of the titles that we're now stuck with. President-elect Ronald Reagan. The other day, a woman was introducing Mrs. Reagan, didn't quite know how to come up with her title, and introduced her as the first next lady of the land, or something like that. We'll be back in just a few moments with the first next daughter of the land. Maureen Reagan will be with us at that time. And then later in the day, Jane and I invite you to join us as we watch the parade from a special NBC booth overlooking the parade route and the reviewing stand.
We've got the first next best seats at the inaugural, right across from the official reviewing stand. So if you're passing by in the parade, wave up at us.
NBC News will be on the air much of today. Of course, you'll see John Chancellor and Roger Mudd as they'll be overlooking the inaugural ceremonies and the swearing in of Ronald Reagan today from about 10 till 2 Eastern Time. We'll see you then. Good morning, everyone. You are looking at the White House, the new residence of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, beginning today, Tuesday, January 20th, Inauguration Day, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You don't find that house in the real estate ad, folks. It takes a little more than that. Good morning, all. I'm Tom Brokaw here with Jane Pauley.
And it's moving day.
That's right. And Willard Scott will be reporting to us live this morning from the nation's capital, from the west front of the Capitol, where the inaugural ceremonies will take place today at high noon Eastern Time. Ronald Wilson Reagan will become either the 39th President of the United States or the 40th, depending on your point of view. At any rate, he will have the full powers of that office. And the final frantic hours of the Carter administration, we are still awaiting word on the hostages in Tehran. All the financial situation has been cleared away now. They can leave there, but they're still not in the air. We'll catch up to that story in just a few moments.
Maureen Reagan will be with us in this hour. She is across from the White House in our NBC anchor booth right now. You know, she hadn't been in Washington for 20 years, she says, and since she worked here as a secretary, she comes back 20 years later and they throw her a parade. That's living.
That's not
We'll be
bad.
with Maureen Reagan shortly.
We'll look forward to that. Now let's take a look at the latest news this morning. On this, the final half day of the Jimmy Carter presidency and the start of Ronald Reagan's administration, there is great hope in Washington and in this country that the long ordeal of the American hostages in Iran may finally be over. We have John Palmer standing by live at the White House with the latest details. John?
Yes, indeed, Tom. With just 4 hours remaining in the presidency of Jimmy Carter, the situation here is one of great optimism. The president is still in the Oval Office. He has been there throughout the night with his top aides following these developments. And the latest word we have is that there are no hitches. It looks like it is all just about to happen. His top aides say that the president merely is now in a waiting mode, along with his advisors who have gone through so much for so many days and months on the situation. They are waiting just to hear those words from the Algerian mediators and from other sources that the planes have taken off and that the 52 Americans are on their way finally after all these months to freedom. It might be noted that one of those gathered with the president during these many hours through the night was Vice President Mondale. And President Carter had invited the Mondales to spend this last night in office in Lincoln's bedroom. But unfortunately for the vice president, he was tied up throughout the night working with the president on these hostage negotiations and that sort of thing. So he never made it to Lincoln's bedroom, but Mrs. Mondale did, we are told. More on the situation concerning the hostages now from Bob Kerr at the State Department.
Thank you, John. Good morning. Pretty much in line with what you've just reported, a spokesman here now says we are watching the airport in Tehran for developments. The British news agency Reuters is now quoting the airport officials there as saying the 2 Algerian jetliners due to carry the hostages are expected to fly out later today. The airport officials there say the hostages were brought to the airport overnight, then taken away, but that they are due back soon. Iran State Radio has broadcast another interview with Iran's chief hostage negotiator, Nabavi, who says he confirms the transfer of assets and says the hostages will be released as soon as the money is deposited. Not long ago, Iran's Pars news agency began transmitting an official government statement on the release of the hostages, but suddenly interrupted that statement. Once again, lots of signs that some sort of action is imminent or may be imminent. The plan, as it was described to me earlier this morning here, is that there would be a 7.5-hour flight the hostages would take to Algeria. There would be about a 1.5-hour stopover there, and then a 2.5-hour flight to Algiers aboard a U.S. medevac plane. So if it all begins relatively quickly, and we all hope it does, then the full and final transfer and release of the hostages could be completed before President Jimmy Carter leaves office sometime just after noon today. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Bob. By the way, Iran says that all of the hostages have been examined by Algerian medical doctors who pronounced them in good shape. We have a report on that part of the story from George Lewis this morning.
The Iranians released footage of 12 of the hostages. Most of them were shown being examined by a team of Algerian doctors. According to reports from Tehran, the doctors were asked to certify that the hostages were fit to travel. Included in the footage, Marine Sergeant John McKeel of Balch Springs, Texas, Philip Ward of Culpeper, Virginia, Stephen Lauterbach of Dayton, Ohio, Elizabeth Ann Swift of Washington, D.C., one of 2 female hostages, Charles Jones of Detroit, the only black in the group, Navy Lieutenant Commander Robert Engelman of Hurst, Texas, Marine Sergeant Stephen Kirtley, Little Rock, Arkansas, Barry Rosen, Brooklyn, New York, William Keogh of Alexandria, Virginia. Other hostages shown having a meal together included Bert Moore, Mount Vernon, Ohio, Marine Sergeant Paul Lewis, Homer, Illinois, and Marine Sergeant Kevin Hermaning, Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the youngest of the 52 hostages. George Lewis, NBC News.
With me now this morning is Dr. Graham Spanier. He is a dean at Penn State University. He's a member of a task force that's been looking at the possible reaction to the hostages once they get out of captivity and get to Wiesbaden, West Germany. I guess the first question is it really necessary for them to be isolated for 7 days from their family? Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I don't think there's anything magical about the 7-day period in particular. There may need to be some variability in that, and I think the State Department has planned to evaluate that time limit as it moves along. But I do think it's important for the hostages to have a period of time in which They can have their health examined, their nutritional status considered, to deal with the problem of jet lag, to learn about what's been happening in the country while they've been gone, as well as to learn a little bit about their families before they return.
We have been treating them as an individual unit. After all, these are 52 individuals, and ought we not to take that into consideration as well?
Yes, I think that's a very important point. Of course, it's very difficult to design a reentry program in 52 ways, so I think what you have to do is come up with one plan and then evaluate that plan as necessary on an individual basis once you learn what some of the particular problems of the individual hostages might be, whether any of them have any special medical problems, and also what their own preferences and family situations are.
All right. We have Richard Valeriani standing by in Frankfurt today with, I believe, one of your colleagues,
yes,
who's already there and in place. Dick, are you there this morning?
Good morning, Tom. Yes, and with me is Dr. Charles Figley of Purdue University. Dr. Figley, why are the families not here?
Well, because the State Department felt very strongly that the family should be kept away, primarily because there may be a difficulty in terms of the reentry program. I'm getting feedback in terms of that, so it's difficult to hear. One of the major things, I think, is that the families would be frustrated not being able to see them, and thus, as a result of that, they would frustrate the program. I think one of the main things is that the State Department feels very strongly that the family should stay in America, primarily because if they join the hostages, it may disrupt the program.
So the State Department thinks that it would be harmful to the hostages if the families were to come here?
Yes. Right.
Now, what happens if the families simply show up?
Well, I think it says a lot for the sensitivity of the State Department that they have provided accommodations for them if they do show up. A number of families have stated publicly that they plan to come.
You have dealt extensively with the families. Do you expect some of them to be here then?
Without a doubt. It's the position of the task force, however, that if it's either all the families come or none of the families come. We feel that some of the hostages getting off the plane that are greeted by their own loved ones, those that aren't greeted are going to suffer, are going to wonder why their families aren't.
Do you think the families are going to resent the presence of an American official, such as even President Carter, when he's no longer president, if he comes?
I think many of the families feel ambivalent about that. They want, on the one hand, they want the hostages to know that the country appreciates what they've gone through in an official statement to that effect, to let them know that they've done their duty, that they've been good Americans. On the other hand, the families feel that they want to be first in line to greet the hostages. They appreciate the program that's been designed, but they don't want politicians in front of them. But again, that's not universal. Some of the families feel that way.
How do you think the families are doing right now? They're up again, waiting for the release of the hostages? No.
I think many of the families, those that I've spoken with, and I think that generalizes to most of them, they're kicking themselves now for getting excited. I think that for many of them, they felt duped into getting excited, being hopeful, because before they were sort of blocking out all these possibilities. When the release was imminent, then they started getting excited. Now, I think that they're some of them in a state of depression, feeling hopeful, but really not convinced that this crisis is over until they land here in Germany.
Dr. Charles Figley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now back to Tom Brokaw in New York.
Thank you. Any problems with that, Dr. Spanier, what he was saying? Any differences?
No, I think I agree with him. The one thing that it's important to point out is that there's a tremendous degree of variability between the hostages and with their family situations. And I think one thing that the American people need to remember in trying to be sensitive in their return is to realize that they are individuals, they will react differently. Some of them will be very eager to participate in parades and community celebrations. Some of them may be reluctant at first. Some will value their privacy tremendously. Others will want to be open with the media. And we need to be prepared for this kind of difference in their reactions, and when it doesn't maybe meet with our expectations of what we would like to see, to be able to understand that and to care about them then as we have over the past 14 months when they were captives.
Dr. Spanier, thank you very much. Good advice, I think, for all of us in almost any situation for that matter. And Dr. Figley in Frankfurt with Dick Valeriani, thank you. Ronald Reagan, of course, spent his last night as president-elect in Blair House, the official guest house. In less than 4 hours now, he'll take the oath of office and the responsibilities of the presidency. Steve Delaney is just outside Blair House, as you can see this morning. Any action down there this morning, Steve?
Well, members of the staff have been going in, Tom. They said they were going to wake him about 8 o'clock if he wasn't already awake, and by now we're quite sure that he's been informed of the developments in the hostage crisis, and obviously he'll be glad to get that one out of the way, if that's at all possible, before the inauguration. Blair House is a place where presidents-to-be who don't have Washington residences, Carter, Nixon, now Reagan, have stayed on the night before their inauguration. In about an hour, he'll be leaving here to go around the corner to church. Be leaving this building, which was purchased by the government some time ago, as an official residence for high-level visitors. Reagan is that until about noon today, when he becomes president. He'll come back from church, and then continuing a tradition that started with Ulysses S. Grant, a delegation of congressmen will come and pick him up, take him to the White House, where he'll see the president for a few minutes. The two of them will ride up the hill to the Capitol, and shortly after noon, Ronald Reagan becomes the 40th president of the United States. But that process all starts here, Tom, at Blair House.
Thank you, Steve. It's 8:12 right now. Willard Scott preceded Ronald Reagan to the Capitol this morning. He's out in front of the Capitol with the latest weather forecast for us. Mr. President, what's going on down there?
Howdy, Tom. Howdy, Jane. This is a Texas hat, and if Vice President-elect George Bush is watching, this one's for you. We are looking west now as you take the next camera shot, and these are the luckiest people here. They got here about 3 o'clock this morning. They're the Seagulls, and they flew in from Annapolis, Maryland. And they're right on the ice, and they didn't have to pay or get credentials. This is the Washington Monument looking west. Beyond that is California. Their favorite son, Ronald Reagan, will be here where I'm standing in just about 3 hours to take the oath of office. They're vacuum cleaning now and getting things in shape, putting the blankets out. Weather across the country. Here in Washington, sun is out now. Hope it'll stay through noon. High of about 50 degrees. Temperatures you see across the country. The big rain spots today in the northwest down through northern California. Showers in the southeast. Some snow from Missouri up through the middle Mississippi to the Ohio Valley. Mild and sunshine in the northeast and cooler and very nice from the Dakotas all the way down into Oklahoma. Now let's check and see what's happening in your part of the country this morning. We have San Diego 70 and sunshine, Albuquerque 50, sunny, Atlanta, Georgia 50 and rain, Washington 50, cloudy. That's it. That's all from right now. See you all later, partners. Here's Uncle Tom's.
Thank you, Willard. First time that a weather set has ever been used 3 hours later to swear in a president of the United States. 8:14 right now. Back in just a few moments. Jane talking with Maureen Reagan. She may have a political future of her own. First, this is Today on NBC.
I think it's fair to say that after noon today, there will be no more roller skating in the East Room of the White House, certainly not by the first daughter of the land. Maureen Reagan will occupy that position, not Amy Carter anymore. Good morning, Maureen.
Good morning, Jane. How are you?
I'm fine. You're checking out the family property just behind you, aren't you?
Yeah, looking at the government housing, yes.
How does it look?
It's not too bad.
Is it true, Maureen, that you haven't been in this city, Washington, D.C., in 20 years?
Not for any length of time. I've been here a couple of times very briefly.
20 years ago, what was the occasion? You were working here, weren't you?
I was working here, yeah. As a matter of fact, I remember the inaugural about 20 years ago. We had several major snowstorms that month, one of them just before, and most of us ended up walking home because people couldn't get their cars out, and they sort of left them in the middle of the street, and the streetcars couldn't run, the buses couldn't run. You must admit we brought lovely weather for this one.
That was the Kennedy inaugural, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
You're celebrating a little more enthusiastically 20 years later, aren't you?
That's true. Yes, as a partisan, I wasn't a part of that celebration.
A rather serious question, if I may, Maureen. You are the most political of your father's children, and you are his eldest daughter. Is there any possibility that you might ever be used, say, in a hypothetical situation like the hostage situation? Would your father ever send you as an emissary to see the hostages, for instance? That's only as an example. Might you be used that way?
Well, I think that there are certain things that you know, you do and or you don't do. I wouldn't anticipate something like that. If he ever asked me to do something, I'd be delighted to, but it's you know, I'm not sitting around looking for a job.
Well, I hear you are sitting around thinking about a job, though. There has been talk, and we've spoken of this before, that you might run for the United States Senate from California. Governor Jerry Brown is talking about that now, too. Are you beyond the thinking stage yet?
No, we've been a little busy getting ready for this small, intimate gathering of thousands or millions today, and everything else has been put on hold.
Your father said last night at the gala that after weeks of being asked by people, has it sunk in, that at some point during the program it sank in. Do you know at what moment it struck him, it hit him?
Well, I think it was just the whole program, but if I had to take a bet, and I haven't talked to him since then, but if I had to take a bet, I would say it was when Jimmy Stewart and Omar Bradley came on the stage.
Either that, or what about Charlton Heston pointing out the direct lineage from Washington, Madison, Adams, Lincoln to Reagan?
Well, it could have been that, too. You have your bet and I have mine. I'll try to find out for you.
Has it sunk in for you yet?
Well, yes, I think it has, but again, there is such an anticipation and such a tremendous opportunity for all of the people in this country and for leadership change right now that it just feels so right that I guess I just say, okay, yes, that's the way it is, right.
Where will you be spending this evening? Will you be moving into the White House along with the family tonight as well?
No, we thought we'd let them have the honeymoon cottage to themselves.
You might be spending time there, mightn't you? I mean, it wouldn't be unusual to see Maureen Reagan more often now in Washington than in the past.
Well, one has to drop by and check up and make sure the family's okay. Yes, we'll certainly do that.
You, in your role as a businesswoman in your export business, is it fair to say that you have been not in an adversary relationship with the government, but an adjunct? How would you define it?
Well, we work in the private sector to recruit U.S. companies into export trade, to sell more U.S. products to other countries. The government has many programs, but government by its nature is a reactive force, and problems have to be solved a whole lot faster than most anything as large as a government can react.
Even in the Reagan administration?
In any administration. And there are things that are better done in the private sector, and not that we don't work with the government, because we do, but we feel that the impetus for programs, especially for export trade, should come from trade itself, from the private sector.
Might you be setting up a branch office, perhaps, in Washington?
Well, I don't know that it's necessary to have a branch. I'm sure that we will, in time, as we would have in any administration, have representatives in Washington, because it's very important that you deal with it. We've set a goal of 10,000 new companies into export in the next 2 years. That's a lot of people to deal with.
You're marrying in June. Will it be at the White House?
Well, it'll be sometime between now and the 4th of July, and it'll be in California.
Maureen, let me know, too, if my seats are as good as yours after the parade is over later today.
Okay, that's the deal. And strawberry ice cream, Jane.
For breakfast. Maureen Reagan, thank you. This is Today on NBC.
Hi, everybody. 8:30 on this inaugural morning. It is January 20, 1981. We just saw a picture of the White House where they have been up all night long, and we are now told that the hostages could be released at any time. All the frozen assets have been transferred to the proper banks in England. We have John Palmer standing by live at the White House this morning with the latest details as they have been described to him down there. John?
Yes, Tom, I'm standing now in the White House briefing room where Press Secretary Jody Powell appeared just a very few minutes ago. He told us that President Carter was notified at 8:17 this morning that Algeria has told Iran that all of its frozen transferred assets, all of its frozen assets have now been transferred to that escrow account at the Bank of England. That escrow account, of course, is under the control of the Algerian government. All now that remains is for the hostages to be released, and that money will be automatically transferred by Algeria, the mediators, over to the control of the Iranian government. Powell said, we now have the right to expect, and we do expect, the release, the expeditious release of our hostages. So that's the situation here. The president is still in the Oval Office with his advisors, and there's been no unofficial announcement that the president might appear here in the briefing room to talk with reporters, but should he come in here, we are told that it would be for television cameras cameras, and it would be some kind of a statement obviously to be made only after the hostages have cleared Iranian airspace, after it's very clear that they are indeed free. So we will be standing by here in the White House briefing room, waiting for that appearance of President Carter, but again, we could not expect it to occur until after it is well confirmed by the Algerians and other sources that indeed the hostages have left Iranian airspace and are on their way to absolute freedom. Now back to Jane Pauley.
Thank you, John. Richard Hermaning, who is the father of Kevin Hermaning, the youngest of the hostages, is with us this morning from his home in Milwaukee. Mr. Hermaning, it's closer and closer. How is it in the Hermaning household this morning?
Well, we are getting a lot closer, and as we now know that the funds have been transferred and everything is go, it should be a matter of hours or minutes, but the time keeps shortening.
Is your patience wearing thin, or the knowledge that it appears to be any minute, any hour, at least any day now, is that enough for you?
That's enough for me, because I've been waiting for 3 days now, and my patience has been good throughout this whole 444 days, so we'll make it.
Well, how might Kevin be? Do you have any indication? He is the youngest. He would have the least experience to draw on to get him through this situation. Do you have any idea how he might be?
Well, I think he'll come out in very good condition. He says that he's very well physically and mentally than he's been in a long, long time, and we shouldn't worry about him at all, so he'll be all right.
President Carter, apparently, as a citizen, Carter will be going to see the hostages when they do arrive in Wiesbaden. Would you like to be there? Has your family been among those who, at least in the last few months, have thought, to heck with the State Department, we want to be there?
No, I'm not among those families. I'm going to wait until he comes back to the Washington area, and that's where our family will greet him.
What if he, on that first phone call, asked how soon you could be in West Germany? Would you have to revise that position?
Well, I'm sure anyone will revise a decision like that if they are asked by their hostage relative to come over.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. You have our very best wishes, and give them to Kevin Hermaning just as soon as you hear from him. We'll be back in a moment with Willard Scott, but first a message. We're in good hands this morning. Willard Scott's down at the Capitol. Hey, Willard, did you know that there's going to be a band in the parade named after you?
Is that right?
The Willard Tigers from Willard, Missouri.
I saw some of the kids wearing their jackets, and as a matter of fact, you know, after the inauguration and the parade, I'll be back up here on Capitol Hill, and we're going to have a parade, and I'm going to be the master of ceremony. It's going to be a big show, so maybe some people in the Washington area want to come by and see that. What you see, this is the NBC booth. I think these are the first pictures we've seen of the booth from inside. This is beautiful. Roger Mudd's chair, I'm sitting in it. John Chancellor's chair is over there. You see that. Behind us on the top of the Capitol, you see just a little extra light. That is sunshine. And I just spoke to the National Weather Service here in Washington. They're good doobies, and they say very good chances of some sunshine throughout the day, some clouds moving in later, and even the rain should hold off till later on this evening. Let's check the map and see what we have in store for us around the country this morning. You see on the big map that little old low-pressure cell. It's not nearly as severe as the ones we've had in the last couple of weeks in the sense that it won't be as cold, much milder, all the way down through Texas where they had some snow yesterday. Little pops of snow breaking out in central Missouri right now, all the way up through the central Mississippi Valley and into the Ohio Valley. High pressure up in New England, mild temperatures throughout New York. Talk about mild, high record-breaking Cut Bank, Montana yesterday, 61, still that record-breaking heat in the far west, and continued rain showers in the northwest, Washington, Oregon, and northern California. Sunny Florida, dynamite. Let's check and see what's happening in your part of the country this morning. We have Buffalo, 32 and partly sunny. Detroit, 34 and clouds. Houston, 45 and rain. Portland, Oregon, 52 and some showers. And that is it. As I say, in just about 3.5 hours, it'll all take place right here. What a beautiful spot, and so far a beautiful day. And now here's Tom.
Thank you, Willard. We have two of Ronald Reagan's favorite entertainers with us today. They're in town especially for the inauguration. They'll be appearing at an inaugural ball at the Hilton Hotel tonight, and then they'll be invited to the White House in the first full day that Ronald Wilson Reagan is President of the United States. I'm talking about Glenn Campbell and Tanya Tucker, two of the hottest singers in the country music scene these days. A real You appeared at the convention last summer. Things went well, opening act, so they invited you back.
Right.
Yeah,
Have you ever appeared at
that's
an
great.
inauguration before?
No, I haven't.
That's my first time, and it was it was a great show.
Yeah. You're going to sing what tonight? Traditional Tanya Tucker, Glenn Campbell fare, or
Right.
will there be something special for the new administration?
Oh, it'll be
A lot of special things.
A lot of special things.
Yeah.
We're nominated for a Grammy this year, which was a surprise to both of us. We'll be doing that, Dream Lover, and I'll be doing all the traditional Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell songs.
Do you think that the tastes of the country will change in terms of what they want in music as a result of the changing political scene? Do you think it'll have any effect at all?
No, well, I've told Tanya, I predicted that I think music is going to get back to the really traditional American, what I call folk pop music, you know.
The basics.
I think, you know, we monkeyed it and twisted it and discoded so much in the 70s. I think there's going to be a nice subtle change for the 80s, you know.
Is Ronald Reagan a country fan?
Oh, yes, he is. Definitely.
It makes 2 presidents in a row, as a matter of fact, who
Right.
like country music.
Well, you know,
Ronald Reagan, I think, likes all different types of music. He's real. I think he's got a great ear.
Yeah.
He does. It's got a good hole in it, too.
Yeah.
That's right. Let me ask you what it's like for 2 people who grew up on the country music scene to suddenly find yourself in the spotlight on you in Washington, D.C. for the inaugural festivities, the President of the United States asking you to come sing at his inauguration and then appear at the White House as well the first full day that he's there. Can you describe for us how that strikes you personally, Tanya?
Well, I think it's really a privilege. I don't think it's all hit me yet. I think I'll go back home and then, wow, look what I did, look what I got to do. I think it's a real privilege, and I'm very honored to be here and very honored that Mr. Reagan would have us here. I think it'll all hit me when I get home, though.
Glenn, you've been a big star for a long time. A lot of nice things have happened to you over the years. But
Yeah, they have. This is
It's another happening in the life of Glenn Campbell, that's all.
just another mere bag of shells. No, I'm kidding. You know, last night, Mr. Reagan, President-elect Reagan, he said Nancy said, has it soaked in on you yet? Has it hit you yet that what is really going on tonight? And he said, during the show last night, which was so great, he said, he looked over at Nancy and says, it's sunk in.
Yeah.
This is really happening to us, and that's really the way I feel about it. But
I think he's like us, though. He's not affected, and he still
he's a very
has things that really to be impressed and to be honored, and I think it's still people that say they're not impressed. I don't know whether they have any soul anymore or not, because I still get impressed by meeting certain people and getting asked to do certain things.
Mr. Reagan's a very humble man.
Have you known him well for a very long time, Glenn?
No, I've met him when he was governor of California, or even before that, a long time, you know,
right.
in L.A., but I haven't seen him, I bet, for probably 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to see him.
Would you like to come back and play the White House sometime?
Yes, I would.
I think it'd be wonderful. Because I think I know Glenn. President Reagan has his total support. I'm sort of a newcomer to politics. I never have been involved too much, but I'm learning more and more.
I came and played the East Room it was a salute to agriculture for President Nixon when he was in office, and it's really a lot of fun because you got a captive audience. You know?
Yeah, you got them there.
They're pretty well behaved when they're there as well.
I know.
That makes a big difference.
I played a jockey's ball one time and got a standing ovation and didn't know it.
Let me ask you about the kind of music that you're most identified with, the country scene, which is really taking off, isn't it? I mean,
yes, it
contemporary country is the kind of the hottest sound around.
It's doing quite well these days.
I call the whole of America country music. It's like, I know a lot of the radio stations now, they're getting around to, they're playing Neil Diamond and they're playing Mel Tillis. And it's like I call it, just the whole broad spectrum of what I call American country folk music, you know. And I'm so happy that it's happening because I think anybody that the labels, I like to see all kinds of music transcend the labels, you know. If I'd have known Rhinestone Cowboy was going to start all this cowboy stuff, I don't know if I'd have cut it or not.
Well, you're the authentic guy.
I think it's wonderful. Like last night, we saw the gala last night, the show,
yeah.
And to have Sinatra on the same stage with Mel Tillis and Charlie Pride,
yeah,
it was wonderful.
Pretty good combination. Tanya Tucker and Glenn Campbell, speaking of pretty good combinations, nice to have you with us this morning.
Oh, thank you.
And we hope that your end of the inaugural festivities goes, well, harmoniously tonight.
Right.
I think it will.
Okay. Thumbs up. That's right. All right. We'll be back right after the station break. I can't remember a busier time in Washington in the years that I've been covering the nation's capital. What with the hostage situation and the inauguration of a new president, going to be a lot going on in this capital over the next few hours as the nation keeps one eye on the inaugural events, the other on the hostage situation in Iran. We have a number of live reports from various locations around the city this morning. You'll be seeing these people beginning at 10 this morning Eastern Time. Roger Mudd and John Chancellor will be anchoring NBC's coverage, then Jane and I will be along with the parade beginning at 2. We have a lot of correspondents scattered around the city as well. Chris Wallace now at the inaugural site. Chris?
Tom, the workers here on the presidential stand are doing what you or I would do just before the company sweeping up, fluffing up the pillows. But in about 3 hours, everything will be ready. And at high noon, Ronald Reagan will be sworn in as the nation's 40th president. Standing out here on the presidential stand, you can understand why the congressional leaders moved the inaugural ceremonies from the East Front over here to the West Front, looking out on a magnificent vista across Washington, the Washington Mall, and off in the distance, the Washington Monument. The people who are standing out there in a couple of hours will hear an inaugural address from Ronald Reagan that is said to be fairly short, about 15 minutes, 2,000 words. And we are told that it will be lofty in tone, philosophical, and not a specific list of actions that the president will take. After the ceremony here, Mr. Reagan will go inside for a luncheon, then about 2:15 drive down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House where he will watch the inaugural parade. That's the story here from the presidential stand.
Chris Wallace, I am sitting here in the cheapest seats along the parade route, the $15 bleacher seats. These are the reserve seats, the cheapest ones along the route, and those who have reserve seats will have Boy Scouts from around the country ushering them to their seats. Here in this reviewing stand, it is Troop 725 from Melrose, Massachusetts. That's suburban Boston. There are $25 seats further along, and also the high-priced $100 seats just across from the presidential reviewing stand on Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, Ronald Reagan said he wanted his inaugural parade to be short and snappy, and it probably will be. Although more than 600 units applied to be in this parade, only 31 bands and 29 horse units were accepted. But those horses will probably not need their special slip-proof shoes, the shoes with which they were fitted for ice and snow, because the weather is simply amazing. It is warm here, so warm that we don't even need our coats. An amazing day for January in Washington, and a wonderful day with which to watch a parade. And in the reviewing stand where the president-elect will, or overlooking the reviewing stand where the new president will be watching that parade, here's Judy Woodruff.
Just after 3 o'clock, the presidential motorcade will arrive at the south entrance of the White House, the side you cannot see. President and Mrs. Reagan will leave their car. They will walk through their new home for the first time as its occupants and emerge on the north side for the short walk to the presidential reviewing stand, which you see behind me. 4 years ago, President Carter ordered it built at an angle so that marchers and TV cameras could have a better view of the White House. This year, it sits directly in front. It measures 40 feet by 80 feet. It holds about 300 people. And in the presidential box will be about 30 Reagan family members and friends. The Reagans will spend about an hour on the reviewing stand watching the parade until it ends, and then they will return to the White House, where NBC's John Palmer is standing now.
Well, Judy, this, of course, is where the Reagans will end this very long, grand day, the inauguration day. They will come here tonight, of course, to spend their first night in their new home, the White House. Actually, they won't be sleeping here tonight because they will be arriving here well after midnight after they have attended a series of inaugural balls. We expect the Reagans to come up this driveway in about an hour and a half or so for that 30-minute or so chat with the outgoing Carter family. Normally, in those circumstances, we're told that it's somewhat awkward with the new president coming in after a sometimes bitter campaign. They talk, they sit there and have a little bit of tea, and maybe there's not too much to talk about. But I think President Carter will have a lot to say, and there will be a lot of questions from incoming President Reagan this morning, and there probably won't be enough time. 30 minutes isn't enough time to tell the story of what has gone on over these many last hours, days, and months, considering the situation with the hostages. And at this point, we are hoping that President Carter will be able, in an hour and a half's time, to greet President-elect Reagan on the front steps and say, "We got a deal, the hostages are free." That's the situation at the White House.
Thank you very much, John Palmer. All those people will be in place beginning at 10 o'clock this morning, of course, as we have complete coverage, the swearing in of Ronald Reagan, and then the parade that will follow. And we'll be on the air between 10 and, well, until it ends. And we'll be back on Today right after this word.
Well, the reason they packed all of those formals and those tuxedos and they rented them from around the country, the occasion tonight, the balls. There are 9 inaugural balls tonight. Our lifestyle reporter Nancy Foreman has come to Washington with us, and you know about the balls.
That's right. We visited one of the locations. Jane, it's the biggest. The Pension Building is truly an amazing piece of architecture, and it has quite a history. These photographs you're going to see are from the Smithsonian Institution.
The Pension Building, completed in the late 1800s, was built to distribute benefits and pensions to Civil War veterans. At that time, it was called the most astonishing interior space in America. The 12,000 people who attended President McKinley's inaugural ball in 1897 paid $10 a ticket, which was expensive by those standards. But a lavish banquet was included. So lavish, in fact, that it took a score of kitchen help a week to wash the 50,000 pieces of china. The preferred music? The sedate Strauss waltzes, with an occasional John Philip Sousa two-step for a change of pace. The Pension Building, which was recently revived and renamed the National Building Museum, has easily accommodated up to 18,000 people. The central court alone covers 1 acre. Presidents may come and go, but the splendor of the Pension Building remains. The cosmetics have changed considerably, however. This year's design plan is to return to the Victorian era, but with the Reagan razzle-dazzle, complete with hosts Donnie and Marie Osmond. The Osmond designer, Seven Nielsen, told us where he got his inspiration.
Upon looking through the archives, there were some beautiful pictures of how this had been done in the past. And the most impressive was the 1901 inaugural ball for McKinley. It was his second one here. And the featured thing at that time were lights. So we went back to the lit swags. They weigh about 60 pounds each. They're not just strings of lights. They're built on solid wood back. And instead of the small lights that were used in the Edwardian era and the Victorian era, we went to the large lights. Of course, everything has to be brought up to scale because this building, as you can see, the grandeur of it makes it the most impressive building in Washington. Those shields weigh about 1,200 pounds each, and they're electrified, and each one of them has 6 12 by 20 foot flags. And those are reminiscent of that era, but I've elongated everything to add more elegance. What we do is we send a volunteer up to the ceiling, which is about 10 floors up. You could put a 10-story building in the middle of this room. So we had to send someone up there with block and tackle to lift them into place, and then with 3 crews working, we pull them, 1 from the top and 1 from each side, and then we anchor them off on the building itself. Go! Take the pressure off the point! How you doing, Donnie?
In the middle of all this activity, tonight's co-host Donnie Osmond himself appeared to look in on the showplace.
The stage is 65 feet across, which is a large stage, but the Osmonds are a large act, and they need a lot of room to move.
There's another star attraction that will be appearing on that stage, too.
The Tommy Dorsey Band, right?
No, I was thinking of President and Mrs. Reagan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course. Yes, he's... No.
President Reagan joins past presidents who have celebrated their inaugurations in this historic structure.
It's going to be quite a night. Today we'll return after these messages.
Gino's Pizza, with a crust so crisp and tasty, you can't believe it's frozen.
Are you sure this is frozen?
Gino, do you swear to tell the truth?
Be more pomp and ceremony.
It's such a sweet.
There will be more pomp and ceremony in today's inauguration than there was 4 years ago. It's a reflection of the different personalities in politics. But symbolism is important, as are the speeches, as we see in this inaugural moment.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Democracy is based on the conviction that man has the moral and intellectual capacity as well as the inalienable right to govern himself with reason and justice.
Americans, indeed all free men, remember that in the final choice a soldier's pack is not so heavy a burden as a prisoner's chains. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The inaugural moments, speeches over the last 30 years or so. Here in Washington today, we are told now that Ronald Reagan will make a personal speech of about 15 minutes in length. What we're wondering, of course, is whether he will make any reference to the hostage situation, which as yet is not finally resolved. All the frozen assets that belong to Iran have been transferred to an escrow account in the Bank of England. That's all been cleared up, but the hostages remain on the ground in Tehran. We are told that they could leave at any time. The plan, as we now know it, is for them to fly to Algeria and then on to Frankfurt, West Germany, where they will be transferred to an American military hospital in Wiesbaden. There they will be given medical checkups and intelligence debriefings. Many of them may not be reunited with their families until they return to Washington, D.C. In any event, whenever they leave Iran, whenever that final joyful moment occurs, NBC News will be here with coverage. And we hope you'll stay with us all day, beginning at 10 this morning Eastern Time. John Chancellor and Roger Mudd will begin coverage of the inaugural festivities of Ronald Wilson Reagan, about to be President of the United States. Jane and I will be here at 2 for the parade, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Goodbye, everybody.